while my wife was finding inspiration. At a writing workshop, I learned the truth about our marriage. My wife, Elena, had always wanted to be a writer. When we met in our late 20s, that dream was one of the things I admired most about her. She worked a practical job during the day, but every evening she wrote. Short stories, essays, half-finished novels that lived in folders on her laptop. Writing wasn't a hobby to her, it was who she believed she was supposed to become. So when she got accepted into a prestigious 6-week summer writing workshop in another state, I was proud of her. Genuinely proud. She framed it as a turning point, a chance to finally take herself seriously, a chance to be surrounded by people who understand the work. I encouraged her to go. I rearranged my schedule so I could manage things at home. I helped her pack. I told her this was good for us, good for her. Looking back, that's the cruelest part. I helped her walk right into it. The workshop was held at a small college campus in a quiet coastal town. She described it as intense but inspiring. Long days of lectures and peer critiques. Evenings spent reading, walking, talking about writing late into the night. At first, she called every night. Those calls slowly shortened. Then they became text. Then, some nights, nothing at all. She blamed exhaustion, dead phone batteries, early mornings. I believed her, because trusting your spouse feels easier than admitting you might be a fool. The first real crack came during week 2. She mentioned someone named Marcus, just once, casually. Marcus said something interesting in workshop today, she told me, distracted, as if his name didn't matter. But I noticed it anyway. When you've been married long enough, you learn the rhythm of your partner's stories. New names don't usually slip in unnoticed. Over the next few days, Marcus appeared again, then again, always framed around writing. Feedback he gave her, jokes he made during class, a shared walk after dinner with a few others. She never said they were alone. She also never said they weren't. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what good husbands do, right? They don't interrogate their wives over imaginary threats. They don't sound insecure. But insecurity has a sound, and it lives quietly in your head, whispering when you're alone at night. By week 3, she stopped answering calls altogether. Texts came hours later. Sorry, long day. Just finished reading. Exhausted. Talk tomorrow? Tomorrow kept not happening. Then came the photo. She posted it on social media, smiling with a group of writers at what looked like a small outdoor bar. Everyone was holding drinks, arms slung loosely around shoulders. Marcus stood next to her. His hand rested at her lower back, not dramatically, not obviously, just comfortably, intimately. The caption read, "Grateful for this experience and these people." I stared at that photo for a long time. I zoomed in until the image blurred. I felt stupid for noticing something so small and even stupider for knowing, deep down, that it wasn't small at all. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I told myself I needed more than a feeling, more than a hand placed too casually. I needed certainty. That was the night I started paying attention. I checked timestamps, posting patterns, the hours she was suddenly unavailable. I noticed she stopped saying, "I miss you." She stopped asking about my day. Every conversation felt like she was already somewhere else. And the worst part, when she did talk to me, she sounded lighter than she had in years. I didn't want to believe what that meant, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that if nothing was happening, I'd feel ridiculous, but relieved. I gave the PI her name, the workshop location, the dates. He didn't judge me. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just nodded and said, "I'll let you know what I find." The waiting was unbearable. Every buzz of my phone made my heart race. Every hour stretched longer than the last. 3 days later, he called. His voice was calm, professional, but his first sentence felt like a punch to the chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "There is something going on." He told me about dinners that weren't group outings, about long walks that lasted hours, about a hotel near the campus that wasn't part of the workshop housing. He sent photos. Nothing explicit, nothing dramatic, just undeniable. Her laughing across a small table from Marcus, their hands intertwined while walking along the boardwalk. The two of them entering the hotel together once, twice, then regularly. I sat on my couch in complete silence. No anger, no shouting, no tears, just a hollow understanding settling into place. She wasn't confused. She wasn't tempted. She had chosen this. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I started planning, not revenge, not confrontation, an exit. I knew if I confronted her while she was still away, she'd explain. She'd cry. She'd promise. She'd ask for time. And I knew myself well enough to know I might listen. So I decided on something colder, cleaner. I would disappear before she returned. I gathered everything I needed, the evidence, the timelines, the financial records. I quietly met with a lawyer. I followed instructions carefully. I changed nothing outwardly. I still replied to her messages, still wished her luck in workshop sessions, still told her I was proud of her. And every time I typed those words, I felt myself detaching piece by piece. By the time her return date approached, I wasn't her husband anymore. I was a man preparing to vanish from a life that no longer belonged to him, and she had no idea what was waiting when she came home. The PI didn't dump everything on me at once. In hindsight, I think that was intentional. When he called the second time, he asked if I was sitting down. I told him I was. I wasn't lying. I had learned quickly that standing while receiving bad news was a mistake. There's more, he said, a lot more. I remember staring at the wall behind my couch, tracing a faint crack in the paint while he spoke. It's strange what your brain latches onto when it's trying not to break. He told me he'd compiled a full report. Photos, dates, times, patterns. Everything was organized, factual, almost sterile. No opinions, no embellishment, just reality. He offered to email it, but I asked him to meet me in person instead. I needed to see it arrive. Needed to feel the weight of it in my hands. Like proof that this wasn't something my imagination had cooked up during a lonely month. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between my house and his office. I got there early and ordered coffee I didn't touch. When he walked in, he didn't look like someone carrying life-altering information. He looked like a guy stopping in for a late lunch. Calm, unremarkable. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "I'll walk you through it," he said. "You don't have to read it all right now." But I did. I opened the envelope with hands that surprised me by how steady they were. Inside was my marriage, reduced to paper. The report started with basic observations. Dates she left campus housing, times she returned, the hotel she favored. Not flashy, not cheap, just discreet. Then came the photographs. There was one of her sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, shoes kicked off, laughing at something Marcus had said. I recognized that laugh. I hadn't heard it in years. Another showed them walking into a small bookstore together, his hand resting at the small of her back again, that same comfortable intimacy. There were timestamps showing how often they spent the night together. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly, patterns formed. Wednesdays, Saturdays, longer stretches during intensive writing days. He hadn't just become part of her workshop experience. He had become part of her routine. I kept flipping pages, text message summaries. Not the content, just metadata. Volume, frequency, late night spikes. Then the PI quietly added, "There's something else you should know." He pointed to a section near the back. She had lied to me about where she was staying. The workshop offered on-campus housing, which she claimed was mandatory. It wasn't. She had opted out. Instead, she split the hotel cost with Marcus. They had planned it that way from the beginning. I stared at that line for a long time. From the beginning? This wasn't a mistake that happened halfway through. It wasn't a moment of weakness after weeks of bonding. It was premeditated. I asked the PI how sure he was. "Certain," he said. "I verified it multiple ways." That was the moment something inside me finally snapped, not in an explosive way, but like a rope quietly fraying until it gives. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just felt finished. We sat there in silence for a while. Other people talked and laughed around us, unaware that my entire sense of reality had just been permanently altered over a cup of cold coffee. Before he left, the PI asked if I wanted him to continue monitoring. "No," I said. "I have everything I need." He nodded, slid his card back into his wallet, and stood. "I'm sorry," he said again. I believed him. When I got home, I didn't immediately look at the report again. Instead, I walked through the house. Our house. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The framed photo from our anniversary trip. The mug she always used, chipped at the handle. Her favorite blanket folded neatly on the couch. All of it suddenly felt like evidence from someone else's life. That night, she texted me. "Long day, exhausted, miss you." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Miss you too, proud of you." The words felt foreign. I realized then that whatever version of me used to exist, the one who would have confronted her immediately, demanded explanations, begged for honesty, that man was gone. In his place was someone colder, more deliberate. I started thinking practically. What would happen if I confronted her now? She'd cry. She'd say it was complicated. She'd say she felt lost. She'd blame distance, or stress, or inspiration, or anything but herself. She'd promise to come home early. She'd promise it meant nothing. She'd promise she loved me. And part of me, the part that has spent years building a life with her, might want to believe it. That scared me more than the betrayal itself. So instead, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell him the whole story at first, just that I needed to know my options, that my spouse had been unfaithful while out of state, that I wanted to protect myself. He listened carefully, asked precise questions. Then he said something that stuck with me. If you're thinking about leaving, timing matters. Silence can be an advantage. Silence. That word echoed in my head all night. Over the next few days, I became methodical. I copied financial documents, backed up records, changed passwords quietly, set up a new email address she didn't know about. I boxed up personal items she wouldn't immediately notice missing. Childhood photos, keepsakes, things that mattered only to me, all while continuing to play the role of the supportive husband. She sent photos of sunsets by the water, snippets from readings she was proud of, complaints about workshop politics. At one point she wrote, "I feel like I'm becoming someone new here." She had no idea how true that was. What she didn't know was that I was becoming someone new too. Not inspired, not reborn, but detached. I started imagining what it would feel like to leave without a confrontation, without giving her the chance to rewrite the narrative. No dramatic showdown, no begging, just absence. The idea brought me an unexpected sense of calm. By the end of that week, I had a plan forming, not fully shaped yet, but solid enough to lean on. I would not be there when she returned. I would leave behind what needed to be said, in the form of facts, not arguments, and I would let her sit alone in the aftermath of her choices without me there to absorb the impact. The report went back into its envelope. I placed it carefully in a drawer, alongside legal documents and a quiet resolve I hadn't known I was capable of. She had 3 weeks left in her workshop. I had 3 weeks to disappear. Once the plan started taking shape, I realized something unsettling. Leaving wasn't the hardest part. Pretending nothing was wrong was. Every morning I woke up in the same bed we'd shared for years, made coffee the same way I always had, and went through the motions of a life that was already ending. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I became careful, deliberate, almost surgical with my behavior. I didn't want her to sense anything was off, not because I owed her comfort, but because I didn't want interference. The plan required her to stay exactly where she was, emotionally confident, distracted, convinced that home was waiting. The lawyer and I spoke twice more that week. He explained things calmly, without judgment, what I could take, what I should leave, what mattered legally and what mattered emotionally. "Don't empty the house," he said. "That looks reactive. Take what's yours and document everything." He also suggested something I hadn't considered yet. "If you plan to be gone when she returns, leave a paper trail that speaks for you. Evidence, not accusations." So I started assembling a second folder, not for court, for her. Screenshots, hotel receipts, photos from the PI's report, dates matched with messages she'd sent me about being too tired to talk. I didn't annotate anything. No commentary, no anger, just facts. I wanted there to be no room for reinterpretation, no chance for her to tell herself a softer version of events. At night, when the house was quiet, I packed. Slowly, I started with things she wouldn't notice. Clothes from the back of the closet, old books, my childhood watch, still ticking softly in its case. Then things she might notice but only later. The framed photo of my parents, a box of letters she'd never read, small reminders that I existed independently of her. Each item I packed felt like a controlled detonation of memory. I learned something important during that time. Grief doesn't always feel loud. Sometimes it feels like logistics. I still talk to her every few days. She preferred texting now, said phone calls felt too grounding when she was trying to stay in the creative headspace. That sentence alone would have devastated me a month earlier. Now it just clarified things. She talked about Marcus more openly, not by name, but in spirit. "There's someone here who really sees my work," she wrote one night. "I feel understood in a way I didn't before." I stared at that message until the screen dimmed. Understood. I wondered how many times she'd felt misunderstood by me while lying next to someone else. I replied carefully. "I'm glad you feel supported," I typed. It was the truth. She was supported, just not by me anymore. The hardest moments came unexpectedly, like when I found a grocery list she'd left behind before leaving. Her handwriting curved gently across the page, familiar and intimate. Or when I opened a drawer and found a note she'd written years earlier, wishing me luck on a big presentation. Those moments tested my resolve. They reminded me that this wasn't a villain and a victim story. This was two people, one of whom had chosen betrayal and one of whom had chosen silence. I reminded myself why I was doing this. because confronting her would turn me into the caretaker of her guilt, because staying would require me to rebuild trust alone, because disappearing wasn't about punishment. It was about preserving what little dignity I had left. By the second week, I secured a short-term rental in another city far enough to feel separate, close enough to return if needed. I paid in advance. No shared accounts, no notifications. I forwarded my mail quietly, changed my banking access, opened a new phone line. Every step felt surreal, like planning a life for someone else. One evening, she sent me a voice message instead of a text. Her voice sounded relaxed, warm, almost happy. "I can't wait to come home and tell you everything," she said. "I feel like this summer changed me." I listened to it twice, then once more, for clarity. She wasn't lying. The summer had changed her. She just didn't realize how much it had changed me too. That night, I sat alone on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes, and allowed myself one honest moment. I admitted I was afraid, not of being alone, but of being forgotten. I wondered how long it would take her to stop missing me once she understood I was gone. Whether she'd replace me with a story that painted her as confused rather than cruel. I reminded myself that none of that mattered anymore. Closure doesn't come from being remembered correctly. It comes from leaving at the right time. 3 days before her return, I finished packing. The house looked almost the same. That was intentional. I left behind the furniture we chose together, the art on the walls, her books, her plants. I left the mug with the chipped handle in its usual place. The only thing missing would be me. The night before I left, she texted me, "Flying back tomorrow afternoon, can't wait to sleep in our bed again." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked through the house one last time, touched the doorframe where we used to mark birthdays, looked out the window where we'd planned imaginary futures. Then I typed my final message, "Safe flight, I'll see you soon." It was the last lie I ever told her. I left early the next morning. No note yet. That would come later. As I locked the door behind me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. For the first time since discovering the truth, my hands weren't shaking. She would land expecting a reunion. Instead, she would find silence. And silence, I had learned, can say everything words cannot. I didn't plan for the dog to die. If I'm honest, I didn't plan for anything emotional to happen at all during those final days. I had built my exit around precision documents, boxes, keys, silence. Feelings were supposed to be handled later, somewhere far away. Life didn't cooperate. 2 mornings before Elena was due to return, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong in the house. Not a crash, not a bark, just a soft, uneven breathing from the foot of the bed. Our dog, Milo, was old, 13, a mixed breed we'd adopted from a shelter when we were still newly married and convinced love alone could fix anything. He'd slowed down over the years, slept more, ate less, but nothing that felt urgent. Until that morning, he couldn't stand. I slid out of bed and knelt beside him, my heart immediately dropping into my stomach. His eyes followed me, tired but calm, no panic, no pain that I could see, just done. I called the vet as soon as they opened. They told me to bring him in. I wrapped Milo in his favorite blanket, the blue one. Elena always complained shed too much and carried him to the car. He was lighter than I remembered. That realization hurt more than I expected. The drive was quiet. I talked to him the whole way, telling him what a good dog he'd been, how lucky we were to have him, how he never caused trouble, never held grudges, never stopped being happy to see us. In the exam room, the vet confirmed what I already knew. Old age. His heart was failing. There was nothing dramatic or sudden about it, just time, doing what it always does. They asked if I wanted to call my wife. I said no, not out of spite, out of clarity. She was on a plane somewhere between her workshop and home, expecting to step back into a life that no longer existed. I wasn't going to ask her to grieve with me over a dog she hadn't been there for in weeks, not when I was already carrying enough alone. I stayed with Milo while they helped him rest. I held his head and whispered until his breathing slowed and then stopped. He went quietly. The vet gave me a moment. I sat there longer than necessary, one hand still resting on his fur, the other clenched around nothing at all. Losing him felt different from losing my marriage. Simpler, cleaner, unbearably sad. Milo had never lied to me. I drove home with an empty blanket on the passenger seat. When I walked into the house, the silence felt heavier than before. Not dramatic, just wrong. The kind of quiet that tells you something essential is missing. I buried him in the backyard that afternoon, beneath the tree where he used to lie in the shade. I didn't mark the spot. I didn't need to. That night, Elena texted me, "Just landed, heading home soon. Miss you." I stared at the message with a strange sense of distance. So much had already happened, and she had no idea. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and finished preparing the envelope. Inside, I placed everything carefully. The PI's report, copies of hotel receipts, a timeline, a short letter. The letter was only a page long. No accusations, no insults, no explanations of my feelings, just this. I know about the affair. I know when it started, where it happened, and how long it lasted. I didn't leave impulsively. I left deliberately. Please do not contact me. Any necessary communication can go through my lawyer. That was it. No mention of love. No mention of Milo. No goodbye. I left the envelope on the dining table, weighed it down with my keys. The house smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. I'd wiped everything down out of habit, like preparing a space for someone else to occupy. Before I left, I did one last thing I hadn't planned on. I picked up Milo's collar from the counter. I stood there for a moment, then placed it gently beside the envelope, not as a message, just as truth. Then I locked the door and walked away. By the time Elena's car pulled into the driveway later that afternoon, I was already miles away, heading toward a city where no one knew my name, my marriage, or the dog we'd loved. She would open the door expecting a reunion. Instead, she would find an empty house, a silent yard, and proof that while she was becoming someone new, everything she left behind had quietly fallen apart. I didn't see Elena when she got home, but I know exactly how it happened. I know because later, through messages forwarded by friends, through fragments she sent my lawyer, through the predictable arc of panic and disbelief, I was able to reconstruct the moment almost perfectly. She pulled into the driveway just after 4 in the afternoon. Her car was packed with bags, notebooks, half-finished drafts of a life she thought she was returning to. She expected the front door to open to familiarity, maybe me standing there, maybe the dog barking, maybe nothing dramatic at all, just home. Instead, the house was silent. No footsteps, no greeting, no Milo. She probably assumed I was running errands. That's what I would have assumed too. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The first thing she would have noticed wasn't what was missing, it was what was untouched. The furniture still where it belonged. Her shoes still by the door. The mug with the chipped handle still on the counter. Then the quiet would have started to feel wrong. She would have called my name once, then louder. No answer. She checked the bedroom next, the closet. That's when she would have noticed it. My side was empty, not ransacked, not stripped bare, just gone. That's when the panic would have started to bloom, not full blown yet, but sharp enough to hurt. She would have grabbed her phone and texted me, "Hey, I'm home, where are you?" The message went unanswered. She probably told herself I was stuck in traffic, that my phone was dead, that I was playing some strange joke. Then she walked into the dining room. That's where the envelope waited. White, plain, impossible to miss. My keys on top, keys she knew well. The sound they made when I dropped them on the table every night. The weight of them in her hand. I imagine she opened the envelope standing up. People always do when they're not ready for what they're about to read. The report came first. The photos, the dates, the hotel receipts. At some point, she would have sat down. I know this because later, she told a mutual friend she felt dizzy, like the room had tilted. She read the letter last. Only a page. Only facts. No rage for her to argue with, no emotion for her to negotiate, just a conclusion. I imagine the moment she reached the sentence about not contacting me. That's when the reality set in. I hadn't left to cool off. I hadn't left to make a point. I had left permanently. Her phone would have come out again. Calls this time. Missed calls. Voicemails she left with a shaking voice, some pleading, some angry, some confused. None of them reached me. My number was already disconnected. The next thing she noticed was Milo, or rather, the absence of him. She walked to the back door, opened it, called his name. The yard was empty. That's when she saw the disturbed patch of earth beneath the tree. No marker, no explanation, just absence. That was the first time she cried. Not over me, over the dog. And I don't say that bitterly, just honestly. Milo was the one constant she never imagined losing. She called the vet. They told her, old age, peaceful, natural. She asked if I'd been there. They said yes. That broke something in her. She tried contacting my parents next. They didn't answer. I had asked them not to. Not because they didn't love her, they did once, but because I needed one clean break in my life. And I needed it now. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did I. I was sitting alone in a rented apartment, listening to a city I didn't know, holding Milo's collar in my hand like a talisman. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the strange, hollow quiet that comes after something irreversible. The next morning, my lawyer forwarded me her first official message. It was short. "I know I hurt you. Please let me explain." I didn't respond. Another came an hour later. "I made a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." Then, "I love you." That one hit harder than I expected. Not because it made me doubt myself, but because it confirmed what I already knew. She loved me the way someone loves a safety net, something they don't appreciate until it's gone. By noon, the messages turned frantic. She asked where I was, if I was safe, if I was coming back. By evening, they turned defensive. She blamed distance, pressure, the workshop environment. None of it mattered. The story she wanted to tell herself didn't require my participation anymore. That night, a mutual friend showed up at the house. Someone she trusted, someone who had known us both for years. They told her the truth she hadn't yet accepted. "He's not coming back." I imagined the silence that followed. I imagined her sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by familiarity that now felt like evidence. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum to a life she'd already left, one I had simply exited first. I turned off my phone and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. I didn't disappear quietly. Not in the way people mean when they say someone just vanished. I disappeared loudly through absence, and absence makes people uncomfortable. Within 48 hours of Elena coming home to an empty house, the messages started spreading outward. Not just to me, I was unreachable, but to everyone who had ever known us as a couple. Friends, co-workers, even people we only saw once or twice a year. Everyone wanted an explanation, and since I wasn't there to provide one, she did. At first, she framed it gently. She told people I had left without warning, that I was overwhelmed, that the distance had changed us both. Some people believed her. I don't blame them. That version of events was easier to accept than the truth. But stories have a way of cracking under pressure, especially when facts exist. Within a week, my lawyer began receiving emails addressed to me. Not legal threats, questions, friends asking if I was okay, if I was safe, if what Elena was saying was true. I didn't answer most of them. Silence was still my strategy. But I authorized my lawyer to respond to one thing, just one. When someone directly asked why I left, my lawyer sent a single sentence. "The marriage ended due to documented infidelity. Evidence exists." No names, no details, just enough to stop speculation. The reaction was immediate. People started doing what people always do when reality intrudes on a convenient narrative. They reassessed. Some reached out to Elena again. Others reached out to me. She tried to regain control. She told friends the affair wasn't what it looked like, that it was emotional, not physical, that she had been lonely. But lies age poorly, especially when the other person doesn't play along. One mutual friend, someone I'd known since college, finally told her what no one else would. "He didn't leave because he stopped loving you," she said. "He left because he stopped trusting you." That distinction mattered. It shifted sympathy. People began to pull away from her quietly. Invitations stopped coming. Messages went unanswered, not out of cruelty, but confusion. No one likes realizing they've been told half a story. Meanwhile, I stayed exactly where I was. I didn't post online. I didn't change my name. I didn't announce a new life. I existed quietly. I found a routine. Morning walks, a new coffee shop, evenings spent reading instead of scrolling. For the first time in years, my life belonged entirely to me. That didn't mean it was easy. Some nights, grief hit me sideways. Not for Elena, not anymore, but for the version of my life I had believed in. For the shared jokes, the plans, the illusion of permanence. And for Milo. I dreamed about him often. In those dreams, he was young again, running toward me without effort. I always woke up with a heavy chest and a strange sense of gratitude. Elena kept trying. She emailed my lawyer asking to pass messages along. She asked if I'd at least acknowledge her pain. She asked if we could talk like adults. My lawyer forwarded them all to me. I didn't reply. That silence did something to her. It forced her to sit alone with her choices. No argument to push back against. No forgiveness to demand. No anger to redirect. Just consequences. Eventually, her tone changed. Less pleading, more bitterness. She accused me of being cruel, of abandoning her, of refusing closure. But closure is not something one person owes another. It's something you build for yourself. I had built mine the moment I walked away. The last message she ever sent, the last one my lawyer forwarded, came almost a month after she returned. It read, "I guess this is who you are now." I smiled when I read it because she was right. I was someone new now. Someone who knew when to leave. Someone who understood that love without respect is just endurance, and endurance is not a virtue when it costs you your peace. She went on telling her version of the story. I went on living. And somewhere in between, the truth settled exactly where it belonged. Not in arguments, not in explanations, but in the quiet understanding of those who mattered. End of part 6. If you'd like, I can continue with part 7, focusing on how he rebuilds his life under the radar, starts over emotionally, and finally stops defining himself by what he lost. Part 7. Part 7, learning how to exist again. Starting over doesn't feel like a rebirth. It feels like learning how to breathe after being underwater too long, shallow at first, cautious, unsure whether the air will disappear again if you trust it. That was my life for the first few months after I disappeared. I didn't reinvent myself. I didn't chase distractions. I didn't announce a new chapter. I just existed. The apartment I rented was small and forgettable, which was exactly what I needed. No shared memories clung to the walls, no echoes of arguments or laughter, just neutral space. I bought a cheap table, a mattress, and one chair. That was it. At night, the silence was different than the silence back home. Not heavy, not accusing, just quiet. I slept better than I had in years. Not because I was happy I wasn't, but because I wasn't pretending anymore. I kept my circle small. A few coworkers, a neighbor who nodded but didn't ask questions, a barista who learned my order but not my story. Anonymity is underrated. It gives you room to become something new without performing it for anyone else. I changed my routine deliberately. I walked instead of drove. I cooked simple meals instead of eating out. I read physical books instead of scrolling through messages I couldn't answer. Grief showed up in strange ways. Sometimes it hit when I passed a couple arguing quietly on a sidewalk. Sometimes when I saw someone walking their dog at sunrise. Sometimes when nothing happened at all. I let it come. I didn't push it away or dramatize it. I just acknowledged it and kept going. One evening, months later, I realized something had shifted. I hadn't thought about Elena all day, not even once. The realization startled me more than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because she no longer occupied mental space by default. She had become a memory instead of a presence. That's when I knew I was healing. I eventually allowed myself small risks again. I joined a gym, took a weekend trip without planning it too much. Started writing again, not creatively, just journaling, putting things down where they couldn't haunt me anymore. I never wrote about her directly. I wrote about choices, about silence, about the cost of staying too long. Milo appeared in my dreams less frequently, but when he did, it felt gentler, less painful, more like a reminder than a wound. I donated his old things except the collar. That stayed with me, not as a symbol of loss, but of loyalty. I never heard from Elena again, not directly. Occasionally, I'd hear fragments through distant connections. She moved, she changed jobs. She told people she had grown. I didn't feel anything about it. Growth that comes at someone else's expense doesn't interest me anymore. What surprised me most was how ordinary my new life felt. No dramatic moments, no sweeping realizations, just peace. And peace, I learned, is not boring. It's earned. It's the reward you get for choosing yourself when no one is watching. By the time I realized I was ready for more connection, more openness, I was no longer desperate for it. I had built a life that didn't need anyone to validate it. That was the real beginning. People think disappearing is an act of anger, that it's dramatic, punitive, designed to hurt. It wasn't. It was an act of preservation. I didn't vanish to make Elena suffer. I vanished because staying would have required me to shrink myself into someone I didn't recognize. A man who explained away betrayal, who negotiated with lies, who accepted half-truths because they were more comfortable than silence. Leaving was the first honest thing I did in a long time. In the months after I rebuilt my life, I thought a lot about endings, about how rarely they happen the way we expect them to. We imagine closure as a conversation, tears, apologies, understanding. Sometimes closure is just the absence of further damage. I never confronted her. That choice confused people. They wanted fireworks, a showdown, a moment where I told her exactly how much she hurt me, but I realized something important. She already knew, she just didn't want to sit alone with it. By leaving without argument, I forced her to face the consequences without distraction. I didn't give her my pain to manage, reframe, or dilute. That was the boundary. Do I think about her sometimes? Of course. You don't erase years of your life like chalk from a board. But when I think of her now, it's without urgency, without longing, without anger, just recognition. She was a chapter, not the whole book. The dog's death still lingers in a quiet corner of my heart. Milo taught me something Elena never did, that loyalty doesn't need to be loud, and love doesn't require explanation. He stayed until the very end, exactly as he was, exactly as he promised, in the only way animals ever do. In a strange way, his passing sealed everything. It reminded me that time doesn't wait for clarity. You either act when the truth arrives, or you live with it buried inside you. I chose to act. Disappearing wasn't about starting over as someone else. It was about returning to who I was before I learned to ignore my instincts. The man who trusted himself, the man who didn't negotiate his worth, the man who knew that love without respect is just a long form of loneliness. I don't regret leaving the way I did. I regret staying as long as I did. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't owe access to people who break you. You don't owe explanations to those who rewrite the truth. And you don't owe closure at the cost of your peace. Sometimes the strongest ending isn't a final word. It's silence. And walking away before what's left of you disappears too.